Is it actually your position that if you win a majority of seats at Westminster in Scotland, you regard that as a mandate for another independence referendum?
Well, of course, what tends to happen in elections, as we all know, is that the party who wins an election is able to push through and push forward with its manifesto commitments. That's something that whoever becomes Prime Minister will seek to do, and in a Scottish context, that's what we would seek to do if we were to win the election here in Scotland. So, of course, that is very much the case. But this election is about so much more than just independence. It's about making sure that we have people in Westminster who put Scotland first, who make sure that we have policies to deal with the cost of living crisis, that we have policies in place to reject austerity, and that we have policies in place to protect our NHS and grow the economy. I'm afraid that the policies of the Labour Party and the Conservative Party fail Scotland in that regard. Their ambitions are too narrow. They don't want to talk about membership of the single market. They don't want to talk about the net zero gold rush that is coming. And of course, neither of them want to talk about the necessity for migration. Indeed, just yesterday, Keir Starmer echoed the sentiments of Rishi Sunak on that, despite the damage it would do to our NHS and despite the damage it would, of course, do to our wider economy. Before we
get onto that, can I just get you to define this word winning a little bit more closely? If you were to get a majority of Scottish Westminster seats, that might be 30, that means you'd have lost more than 20 of the seats you currently hold. How is that winning?
Because, of course, if you win the most seats at an election, then you have been given a democratic
it'd be a pretty
right
big slap in the face
place your
if
policies.
You lost 20 seats.
But of course, you're seeking to preempt the election. I'm very confident that right across Scotland we will be in a position, a rightful position.
I'm not the one who's preempted it. You're the ones who've been saying that you'll take a position if you win a majority of the seats. I'm just asking you, how is that winning?
Indeed, but that's the basic premise of a democratic election. The party that wins the majority of seats therefore gets to put in place its manifesto. But I want to win seats right across Scotland. I want to make sure that we retain the seats that we have and to gain some seats like the Conservatives in Scotland, because it's the SNP who are best placed to beat the Conservatives in all the seats that they currently hold. So my ambitions are greater than simply winning a majority of seats in Scotland. I want to see us do exceptionally well, and I'm very confident that come the 4th of July we'll be able to defy some of the critics' expectations in that regard.
There's a sense in which the way you talk about this Westminster election, you talk about it a bit as though it doesn't matter that much to you, to be honest. Is it the case that what you're really interested in is keeping control of Holyrood?
So the Westminster election could not be more important for Scotland's future, because we have a Conservative Party and a Labour Party who are partaking in what the IFS regard as a conspiracy of silence on austerity. £18 billion of public sector cuts are coming down the line, and neither of those parties are providing answers in relation to that. When it comes to the economy, it is only the SNP who's being clear that what we need to see is a return to the single market, a return to freedom of movement and investment in net zero technologies of tomorrow. And of course, when it comes to our NHS, it is only the SNP who is championing further investment in our NHS and is stating categorically that we will not open the doors to privatisation, in stark contrast to both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. So this election is hugely important. It's hugely important to families up and down Scotland, but the most important thing for them is to determine who is going to be that strongest voice for Scotland in Westminster, who is going to stand up for their values and who is going to put the interests of Scotland first. And in that regard, only the SNP can be trusted to do that.
You're obviously acknowledging that there are no circumstances in which the SNP will be in Downing Street. There will either be a Labour Prime Minister or a Conservative Prime Minister. Let's talk about what happens if, for example, there isn't an outright majority. Are there any circumstances in which the SNP would vote to keep the Conservatives in office?
No.
Good. That's helpful and clear. So, a vote for the SNP is essentially a vote for a Labour government.
It's a vote to put Scotland first, to put Scotland's priorities first and put Scotland's values first. Now, I've outlined
if you would never keep the Tories in government,
in respect of that.
If you never keep the Tories in government, you're not going to be in Westminster yourself. That means that you want a Labour government. Why didn't you just come out and say so?
Well, what I want is Scottish National Party MPs who will be on those green benches fighting for Scotland's interests and putting Scotland first. Now, it's primarily for the rest of the UK to determine who is going to be the next Prime Minister. What we will seek to do is make sure that Scotland's voice is heard within that chamber, and that a UK Prime Minister, be that Keir Starmer in all likelihood or Rishi Sunak, knows exactly what the views and the feelings of the people of Scotland are when it comes to independence, when it comes to the cost of living crisis, when it comes to austerity, when it comes to our NHS, and when it comes to growing our economy. We have been a distinctive voice for Scotland in that chamber, and we will continue to be so. And lest we forget, of course, when it comes to the biggest foreign policy issue of recent years, it has been the SNP that has been the primary force driving for a ceasefire in Gaza. We managed to change the position of the Labour Party alongside public opinion, and we will continue to press them in every way we possibly can to make sure that they finally do the right thing, because this status quo, this stability at Westminster isn't good enough for the people of Scotland.
Is that really the thing that you want from Labour? I would have thought from listening to some of your members that the more important thing that you want to hear from Labour is that their current position, which is that there will be no new oil and gas licences in the North Sea, which you have said will cost many, many jobs in Scotland. I would have thought that that's the thing you really want to hear from Labour, that they've changed their position on that. But from what you've just said to me, Labour is going to count on your votes come what may. So you've basically just surrendered your entire negotiating position with the Labour Party, haven't you?
No. Of course we haven't. And
why should they
when
pay
we
any
talk
attention
about
to you?
energy
Because you're
jobs,
never going to vote for the Tories. So basically, why should they pay the slightest bit of notice to you?
Well, of course, as you know, if we are to operate within a hung parliament, Scottish National Party MPs don't vote on issues that only affect England. And if the Labour Party can have a majority within the House of Commons chamber, they would have to come and chap on our door to try and convince us to do otherwise. But if we want to talk about energy, it's not the SNP that's saying that there's going to be 100,000 job losses as a result of the Labour Party's policies. This is industry investment experts who are saying that. And it's not just to do with ending new licences, it's to do with removing investment allowances, and it's to do with extending taxation upon the industry. 100,000 jobs. And if you take away those 100,000 jobs, you are no longer in a position to reach net zero, because the people that can do that for you, the very clever people who live in my part of the world, the ones who can drive investment and deliver that net zero future, are the ones who would lose their jobs. And they're a very transient workforce and would seek to go elsewhere to support their families, and rightly so. What the Labour Party are proposing is extremely dangerous, not just for the northeast of Scotland, but for right across Scotland's economy. It's why experts have been calling them out on it, it's why we've been calling them out on it, and it's why the public need to reflect upon the damage that their policies will do to our economy should they get in power. And of course, that's the reason why we need SNP MPs there, because if we're going to capture our renewables opportunity, we need SNP MPs there to put Scotland first in that regard.
All right, the last question, if I may, and this might be an easy ask of the Labour leader. Scotland faces Germany in the opening game of the Euros. Are you going to send him a Scotland shirt to wear for the occasion?
You should have one anyway. I'll be there with my Scotland top on, my kilt on, and Stein in hand, enjoying myself. And I'm looking forward to Scotland not just beating Germany, but Scotland winning the Euros. It's high time we created some history, is it not?